Here we are. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome back to another Cartoonist Cooperative stream, but this one is informational this time.
Fancy stuff.
We want to do a round table of introductions, like starting from the top going down.
Starting from the bop.
Starting
Here
from
we
the
go. Turn on the music once again. Let's go to the BRB.
Who's on top, though? Isn't it different?
Oh yeah, it's different for everyone.
Oh,
huh?
I think on the stream it's me who's on top.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, hi, I'm Joan. One of the folks on the steering committee. I use they them. Super excited to chat with y'all.
I'm Nero. I'm another steering committee founder type of guy. He, him. Here to talk about numbers.
Yay.
Numbers.
Who's next? I can't see.
It's me. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Zach. I'm also a member of the steering committee and a co-founder. Yeah.
Cool. And I'm Sloan, also a co-founder with everybody else here. Any pronouns are fine, and yeah, excited to dig into our survey.
Yeah. Our other steering committee members, Romina, Yi, and Aaron, could not make it, but they are sending their love.
Psychically.
Yeah, we assume.
Yeah. You may see Aaron around chat though, so.
That's right.
Alright. Did we want to hop right into the worker survey then? So you can give a quick background.
Yeah, I can do that.
Sick.
So yeah, we just wanted to talk about the survey we ran last year. So this was, what's the word for it? Sophomore effort? What is like an early effort? As in there was like a lot of obstacles and a lot of learning required to do this. But we got it done. So yeah, we had like a small data and survey team of about 4 to 5 people. We ended up getting about 100 respondents, US based. This was specifically for US based cartoonists, because we kind of wanted to focus on basically just US for now, because international cartoonists have different challenges, and we are going to do an international survey this year too as well. So yeah, a lot of our worker survey is about income and rate transparency. This is important because we want to see pay inequity across our different workers in different roles. And yeah, our goal is to do this annually so that we can see trends in our rates, our advances, and other things, maybe our costs of living as well. And yeah, I think we got some pretty useful information, even though, I think 100 respondents is a pretty decent, group of basically data points for our first time, but I'm hoping we can get more this year, especially since we've grown like 600, I think probably 600 or 700 members since we ran this survey from last year.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday, and I'm pretty sure we're going to hit 1,000 by the end of the summer. It's a lot of people.
So many people, so exciting. And then of course I will read our little disclaimer, which is basically, as an organization, the Cartoonist Cooperative doesn't set rates, doesn't advise members on what rates or rate structures they should choose. It varies depending on the work you're doing, the time you're scheduled, and your degree of expertise and experience. And a bunch of other variables. So all we can do is give you the data that we collected, and you can make a decision on your own about how you want to act on that. And yeah, we have if we want to, I think there's actually a link in the description on the YouTube, but you can go and download the PDF if you want to follow along as we kind of go through the survey report. There's a methodology section, which it gets into more detail, and you can read it there. We won't read it here just for time. But yeah, we can go on to findings.
Yeah, so our findings pretty much this is the bulk of the survey. But first off was the respondent demographics. We asked each survey participant to list kind of where they live, how they identify career-wise. The average career age was 9 years, so people who aren't necessarily newbies at this were kind of the bulk of people who answered. 32% in the 35 to 44 age range and 54 in the 25 to 34 age range, which to me that's pretty typical of what I've seen in my circles. Pretty much everybody I know is in their 30s at this point. 79% identified as a cartoonist, as specifically that is what their career is, that's their path, that's what they want to do. Only 40% of respondents were agented, which can get a little messy with stuff like a webtoon, and if you're just like a letterer or a colorist. But yeah, and then the respondents were from, and the top location was California, second was New York State, third was Oregon, fourth Washington, and the fifth, I believe that's Minnesota. Okay. And then we also list the annual cost of living for each. I find it really interesting that the top one also has the highest cost of living, especially with like the salaries that we'll talk more about, like the average salary later. But I find that's an interesting. I guess it has to do with like the creative industry and such. But I don't know, it was an interesting point. Are we good to go on?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, our next point here is getting into specifically talking about page rates, which is a pretty important topic here. This was one we definitely wanted to make sure we took some time to explain with the little talk back here, right? So we have the different page rates split up amongst different parts of the comic making process, right? Whether it's scripting, like writing out scripts, pencils, inks, colors, and letters. And now, of course, there's a lot of folks, a lot of cartoonists who are doing all of this at the same time or in different parts of that process, right? So the way that we had set it up with this survey being that if you're someone who was paid for like multiple stages of the project, say if you are a cartoonist who is doing all of these, that those people would take their rate and divide it amongst those stages. So a lot of the rates that you're seeing here are rates that say include folks who maybe were paid at once for their work in multiple stages here, but divided up amongst these accordingly. With that in mind, we have folks on the scripting side with an average rate being about $60, with the highest rate that we have recorded being $250. For pencils, that factors out to an average rate of around $95, with the highest rate hovering still around $300. Inks is around the same, with the average rate being at $70, and that highest rate again is at $300. Colors, we have the average rate at $60 with the highest rate at $200. And then letters, we have the average rate being at $20 with the highest rate being at $30. Lettering being a very important part of the process that does not get treated with as much love as it should deserve, I would argue. If we go into more detail here, on the next page we have the average page rate as it relates to the amount of time spent per page and how much people were getting as an average hourly rate tier. So you can see that along with the average rates that we described, folks, were, for that time, folks were getting different hourly, for folks who were spending around 5 hours per page on the scripting side, we're getting this much, looking at about $12 an hour for that, which, as you're going to see for all of these here on this page, on that page, with the hours spent per page and hourly rate, that a good chunk of these are below minimum wage. This is it's pretty dire. It doesn't cleanly factor out that way for all of these, of course, because it's different minimum wages depending on where you're living. And as we pointed out, a lot of this is based on the US primarily, but with that in mind, you can see that folks who are working on scripting were typically expecting an hourly rate of around $12 an hour. Pencils, we saw around an average hourly rate of $11.88. I think we need to get onto that next page of page rates, by the way.
This one? I'm on the advances page.
The stream might be delayed.
Yeah, I think it's delayed for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry. We're on the one with hours.
Yeah, we're on the right one. Cool. Inks, we're looking at hourly rate of $10 an hour. For colors, we're looking better relatively, but still only at $15 an hour. And letterers, at least for the time they're spending, are getting $20 an hour. But that, again, factoring that in with average rates is still frustrating.
It's hard to get work as a letterer, isn't it? I'm not a letterer, so I'm not super familiar with that element of the industry, but it seems like it's difficult to get consistent work that way, even if it's technically the highest average hourly rate.
Yeah, I think also the respondents who are letterers, I think that might have been our least represented role. So this is only a very small sampling size. I know lettering can be pretty bad. I think we had one person who was got $5 per page for lettering. They do manga lettering. But it can be pretty rough. But we did get some really high people, veteran letterers who submitted, so that's kind of why our average is a bit high.
Yeah, the range very much skewed very high to very low on from what we were able to see. That it's and like Nira said, that it can be kind of hard to actually get consistent work in that lettering specifically. Yeah, are we good for the next part then?
I think so, yeah.
All right, let's move on to advances then. I'm going to start by reading the explanation that we have written in the document, because I think a lot of people think they know what advances are, and what you probably think an advance is what would make sense, but the way that they actually work out are not exactly what you would imagine. So when a publisher acquires a book from an author or creative team, they're typically offered an advance against the book's royalty earnings to support the creator's work, commonly referred to as just an advance. These advance payments are often cut into installments based on certain milestones, with the initial advance commonly referring to as a signing advance, or the final payment being the delivery advance. So if we look here, we could see we have everything broken up by books that are 25 pages or less, 25 to 150 pages, 151 to 300 pages, and then, of course, the big boys, the 300 plus. So, what kind of advances are we getting? If we're in the 25 page or under range, average advance is around $300, with the highest recorded advance being $1,200. For 25 to 150 page books, the average advance goes up to $900, and the highest recorded advance, $2,800. For 151 to 300 page graphic novels, which is probably the most common type of graphic novel that most publishers are picking up right now, that's $3,000 for the average advance, and a big whopping $75,000 for the highest recorded advance. Although, hold on, because $75,000 may sound like more than it actually is. 300 plus pages, $5,100 advance, and $100,000 is the highest recorded advance that we received for the survey. So if we go to the next page, we can start to see how the time is structured for these advances, or what the publisher expects the amount of time to take for what they're giving you an advance for, and the actual amount of time that it may take. So for up to 25 pages, the publisher will on average assume a 5-month period. The actual time work averaged out to be around what it looks like 2 months, give or take. For 25 to 150 pages, the time scheduled for the publisher to work was a little over 10 months, maybe 10 to 12 months. And the actual time worked somehow managed to be around that much. Once you get to 150 to 300 pages, though, we start to see that the time that that was scheduled by the publisher ends up being a little bit shorter than the actual 15 plus months it will take to create a book that long. Then the 300 plus range, the time scheduled here could probably vary a lot. So we have up to 30 months from time scheduled for publishers, and the actual amount of time averages out to be somehow actually a little bit less than 150 to 300 pages at around like 13 months or so.
I'd assume that's probably because of people panicking because their advance is starting to run out.
Exactly.
I know I've definitely been there.
Yeah, and we're about to get to why that is. How do these advances run out so fast? Well, if you go to the next page, we see that advances are often split up in many parts in some cases. We have less than 5 respondents had no split on their advance. Somewhere in the 10 to 15 range, we have half. So that means that they received an advance probably, right when they signed the contract, and then another one after reaching a certain milestone. Then we have it in thirds, so that's broken up into 3 different payments. That's around the same amount of respondents found that their advances were split up into thirds. The most common appears to be fourths, so that means, probably either, depending on the timeline, quarterly or twice a year, maybe even less. So these advances are stretching for multiple payments, and you have to be able to support yourself between these payments somehow. And then in these edge cases, we get certain scenarios where they're split up even into fifths, sixths, or sevenths, so you could be waiting for a long time to get those payments. Say you're getting that $70,000 advance, but then it's split up into $7,000, $10,000 payments, and you may only be getting 2 of those payments a year if you're lucky. And then onto the last part, as Tom Petty put it, waiting is the hardest part, and we're onto payment tardiness, something that I think we all know. So surprisingly, most of our respondents found that their payments did not come late, which is great. It's great to hear. Some found that their payments were 1 to 3 months late. That's about 20 respondents, a little bit more. Then between 10 and 20 respondents found that their payments were 4 to 6 months late, which already, that's awful long time to wait. Then 7 to 10 months for only a small number of respondents. And then tragically, 11 plus months, which could also mean you never got paid. You just got ghosted. And that's almost 10 respondents out of 100 found that. And I think without further ado, we can move on to royalties.
I believe this was me again, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So royalties are interesting, similar to advances, where people kind of have a little bit of a misconception. It's a chunk of money that you get based on each sale. A retail price royalty refers to the percentage the author gets for every copy sold, based off the retail price. A profit participation royalty, sometimes called back-end, is when an author gets paid a percentage of the book's net profits. So, and it's interesting because royalties come up frequently, especially in like the graphic novel sphere of things. But 45% weren't offered royalties at all, which could mean anything from just not a great deal to they're working on like predatory work for hire contracts. But 55% did receive royalties. 30% of these were profit participation royalties, and 70% were retail price royalties. And then the average of this royalty is 8% of the retail price. Which again can sound good up front, but maybe if you're working with a publisher that doesn't necessarily promote your book outside of the launch, a profit participation may not be great when you're 3 years down the line and still waiting to hit I'm spacing on what it's called at the moment, but sometimes some publishers don't pay out until you hit a certain amount. Following this up, according to Cornell Law School, a work for hire or work made for hire refers to works whose ownership belongs to a third party rather than creators. Under general copyright principles, a copyright becomes the property of the author who created the work. However, work for hire is an exception to this principle and can be established through contract before a particular work is created. A lot of works like oh yes, earn out. Thank you, Steve. A lot of work like for using established characters could be considered work for hire. The high percentage means most respondents do not see any further income, either royalties, licensing, merchandising, anything, which was a staggering 65% of the people that filled the form out, which that's not. Work for hire contracts aren't great. They're often used to take advantage of our work in really predatory ways, and it's it's a shame to see this kind of thing happen consistently. Do we want to go to conclusions, or if anyone else had anything to talk about royalties on, because that gets complex.
It'll come up in our findings here.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so we've thrown a lot of numbers out there, but it's important to talk about what at least we are able to determine from the information that we do have, at least from the respondents that we were able to look at. We're seeing that the U.S. comic worker is looking at an average of $21,000 through their comics work, with the median range of $10,000 overall, which when we talk about comics work, we're talking about advances, we're talking about royalties, licensing. So it's not even upfront work that we're talking about when we're talking about this. And even if we were talking about a regular wage from everything that we're discussing here, the idea of $21,000 being the average that someone is making is far below the poverty line and not enough to cover the expenses of the majority of living situations anywhere in in the United States. We laid it out here where the average minimum income typically expected for living expenses, assuming you don't have friends, family, some kind of government assistance, is around $60,000, which means that the majority of comic workers are not able to actually survive on their work. And as we pointed out before, the majority of people making comics are not making even the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour from their comic work. A big reason why we made a point to bring up the work for hire contracts in there, and the statistic there being that so many people who are making comics are just not able to see anything after their work, see any benefits after, while large companies who put out these work for hire contracts continue to receive the benefits. We can head over to the next page to give a more an even more frustrating example, debatably, talking about the average cartoonist work year, right? If we're looking at we were looked at the work schedule for 150 to 300 page comics, where the average advance that we saw is we're looking at around $30,000. However, if you look at that $30,000, which separating that into quarters, where you have a quarter of that advance on signing, looking at a quarter at pencils, inks, completion, assuming that factors out to roughly even amount of time, which that's doesn't always work out that way. The idea being that a cartoonist is only going to be seeing $15,000 of their advance, and it might take a year or even more for them to even see the rest of that, which is basically hovering around the poverty level in the United States, with the actual metric being 14,580. It is quite dangerously very, very confident to say that is hovering around the poverty line. It's absolutely awful to see, and it's something that the fact that the majority of cartoonists that we were able to survey, comic workers of all kinds, are dealing with this, is something that this is a huge reason why so many folks are either working on multiple projects or have other jobs to actually be able to supplement the work of making comics and to make that sustainable. It is, people who want to actually make a living making comics cannot do it. And it's really, really disheartening. We have closing notes, but of course, if other folks have things to add before we continue.
I'm happy to jump to closing notes, and then we can talk a little bit if we like.
Mm-hmm.
Last year when we were running the survey, of course, there was so many strikes happening. I think it was 400 strikes. Was that just last year, actually? Which is crazy. It says more work stoppages involving over 1,000 people that we've seen in over a decade. Unionizing workers are seeing better wages across the board for their contracts, proving that collective action is working. So we know this will work. We just have to collectivize. And we are collectivizing. We're almost at 1,000 members, which is very exciting. I'm pretty sure, Nero, correct? This is kind of the biggest comics labor movement in history. Can we safely say that?
Yeah, no, we can definitely safely say that. By combination of our numbers plus how long we've been going, it's absolutely the largest. There's a piece on our journal about organizing in comics, actually.
Yes, definitely everyone should go read that. It's a 2-parter, and goes through the whole history of comics labor organizing, the brief history. But yeah, we're making some big moves and I'm very excited. I did pull some comments from our respondents. They will of course be anonymous, but I thought they were kind of relevant to just like kind of like add a little bit more context to our survey. A big thing was work for hire. I think that is a pretty dire percentage to have 65% of the 100 respondents doing mostly work for hire work. It's not great. It's not usually worth it unless they're paying you enough to cover potential sales and royalties in the future, which usually they're not. So I consider work for hire a little bit predatory, or at least just like it's usually not to your advantage. So I don't know. I would encourage people to try and do their best to not do work for hire, or if you are, try and get some sort of supplement to replace that lost income that they're trying not to give you. Healthcare. One respondent said that was their biggest expense. It was like two cartoonists, and together they pay $1,200 a month, and it does not cover does not cover much, excuse me. And one of those respondents was pregnant, and they said it was incredibly burdensome to not have any support and still be paying that much. What else? I thought this was a good comment from one of the respondents about lettering. It says, apart from pay rate, some of the letterer specific issues include work for hire is the norm, no cover credit, there's no script norms, meaning scripts are not formatted consistently, so that can change the amount of labor that goes into lettering, because they may have to figure out how this script writer is formatting, figuring out what they mean by certain notations. A lot of stuff is, it says frequently made to letter unedited scripts and art, and later revising on the lettering page, which is horrible. So that results in extensive revisions with no revision charges, usually. Publishers rarely budget for letter revision fees, and they frequently engage lettering services at the last minute because lettering is at the end of the production schedule, so a lot of burden is put on the letterer to go really, really fast so they can keep to their schedule. And then, of course, again, listing letterers among creatives remains controversial, especially like among award committees. And I mentioned earlier, another person who does manga lettering is criminally low wages, $5 a page, they mentioned. I would say, also another common thing is people find that they make more reliable money from self-publishing on like Itch.io and Patreon, as opposed to traditional publishing. It's more reliable. Another thing I noticed generally, this was not a comment, but my observation was a lot of people did not know what they need to make annually to live comfortably. And I thought that was kind of overwhelming. Like, people were not taking the survey because they just didn't know. Like, they couldn't give us an answer, and they're like, didn't want to really audit their finances, which I totally get. And I also think, of course, this is like a bigger issue across the board for everyone struggling to like try and survive off like really low wages, rising housing costs. The concept of like trying to organize your finances kind of just goes away because it's like a hypothetical. Like, why am I planning for a future when I can't even plan for like the next day? That is kind of where a lot of cartoonists, artists, any sort of undervalued labor is. It's like, if there's no long term that you can depend on, then people don't really plan for that. That was just one thing I observed. And that is it for my notes. I think this was really useful. I'm very excited to use this as a base for our actions that we're working on. And then, of course, to run the survey again, see how things are progressing or not progressing. Does anyone else have any comments on the survey or how they feel about the data that we've just gone through.
Did you want to go first?
Yeah, I
Jen?
gotta. I'm still thinking. If you have
Okay.
something.
I have a thought. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's interesting that so many the map that had let me go back to the map real quick.
Mm.
It's interesting that there's so many of us in like kind of these expensive cities when we don't make very much, and I feel like a lot of that, especially with like the because it's California, Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, and New York, which are all areas that have very strong kind of like social services and also creative communities. There's a corollary there that I find interesting, in that like these areas are very creative centric when also we don't make very much. Like I know what Portland was really like the hot spot to be a cartoonist in kind of like the late 2000s, early 2010s. Like I know it still is, obviously, but part of that was also just like the living costs and social services. Like I can live in Washington because I depend on so many social services to make ends meet. Like I have a very cheap housing situation, and I'm on like food benefits and such, and like that's how I can live in Seattle.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
interesting.
No, yeah, Washington has no income tax, no personal income tax. And then
Yeah.
Oregon doesn't have any sales tax. So between the two of them, I live right on the border between the two to try and benefit from both. But yeah, that's probably why everyone's out here. And of course, I think a lot of people are in California because, they have animation industry. There's a lot of crossover there with cartoonists, games and stuff. So yeah.
It's also maybe it's an anecdotal thing, but I also personally, Washington is expensive, but also it's nice even if I have like $10 in my bank account, I can go out and look at the water and be like, wow. At least there's still fish, even if I can't get paid on time for once in my life.
Totally. But yeah, I think this was a good starting point for us as an organization. I'm really eager to we're all working on a best practices guide that we want to share with publishers soon. We want to eventually start negotiating with publishers for baseline rates, which of course we want to be livable. And yeah, I'm even though this is kind of like a dire painting of like where we are right now, I think we can definitely improve it together.
Yeah, like the best practices thing is going to be interesting because we're collaborating with the National Writers Union and the Freelance Solidarity Project to kind of make a version that is for comics specifically. That will kind of outline a lot of these very specific problems with our industry, such as work for hire in many cases.
Yeah, and I see folks that are pointing out, talking about the desire. I think a big part of starting this process is as a foundation for more surveys, for eventually to be able to do surveys outside the US and to be able to expand to poll comic workers internationally, because there are problems faced by the exploitation of wages internationally as well. So it's very much the foundation of setting the precedent so that we can continue to do this, to continue to set this as a guideline, and also so that at a certain point, if you know that someone is charging below these rates, which are already bad, but if somehow you're not getting this much, it's already too low. So really keeping that in mind, as you know, the floor is so low for what people are making right now, but we can't have it go lower.
Yeah. I would also encourage people, I forgot to mention this earlier, even though it's a pain in the butt to do, I would try and audit yourself for a couple months about what you're spending. Just basic stuff, rent, groceries, utilities, healthcare, just a couple categories, find an average and get a ballpark of what you need. Because I feel like every day we're always getting asked, what should I charge for this piece? What should I charge for inking a page or whatever? And it's not necessarily about the quality of your work or how long you've been working as a cartoonist. It's got to be dependent on what you need to survive. Like it can't be all these like little variables that vary from person to person. Like it's got to be that. And then once you know that, and then you can compare it to, like Joan was saying, average rates and highest rates. You can be like, okay, I need this to live, and I also don't want to probably drop below the average. So between those two, figure out what you need, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's all really, really solid advice. I don't know, if financials get scary, especially when so many of us are visual artists. We're not necessarily the best at numbers.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But it's still worth to
bad.
It's still worth to sit down and do the math, or to at least ask a friend to help you do the math, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely depend on my close friends to look at certain budgets for projects and be like, okay, did I like stick a 0 in here where there shouldn't be, or
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And one thing I would really like to push for next year as well, in both like the US and the international versions, is I really want to talk to more webtoon people, because the way their work is split is a little different.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
But I guess as a, if it hasn't been made clear as we're talking about it, art is labor just like anything else, and it needs to be treated as such, and everyone needs to be paid fairly to be able to live off of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think we have a few minutes if we want to take some questions from folks who are here. If folks have any thoughts they want to drop in chat just while we're here.
Yeah, like any questions about how it was organized, or what we want to do for next year, or just like anything in general.
Just anything about the co-op in general.
Yeah, like part of this is just so we can talk to people in like a open house style way.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know some people get a little intimidated when they see us and they see all that there's forms and things to sign and such, and it's like, no, it's okay. We're all dinguses in the comic page of life.
Yeah, I saw some questions that were coming in while the stream was going around whether the submissions were agented. Clarifying that 40% of responses were from folks who were agented. There was a question about whether freelancers are allowed to organize in the US, which is I think a good one for us to answer on stream, because the answer is it's complicated. Especially
in comics, where it's not everybody is necessarily like an independent contractor too.
Mm-hmm. And who is actually able to and the definition of an independent contractor is, at least at the moment, seems to be in flux, where it is, not to say that we are still figuring out how it's actually going to work in terms of independent contractors organizing, if cartoonists can still be considered independent contractors under new labor guidelines. Yeah.
And that's something we want to talk about in our best practices document as well, is like, if one of the notes I had put down was, because I just kind of spewed a bunch of ideas into a Google Doc, but one of them was, if you're being repeatedly hired by a certain company, they should bring you on as an employee. You should get W-9 benefits, which I believe is kind of where the new labor laws under Biden are at now, where if you have a repeated amount of work from someone, they should consider you an employee. But that's still in flux and isn't necessarily nailed down yet, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
We had a comment from somebody who said they just found us and want to know what the co-op is about, so I'm just going to quickly do our little pitch.
Yeah, do it.
But basically, the Cartoonist Co-op is a volunteer-run organization. We aim to improve and protect the careers of comic workers globally. So we're talking about artists, letters, colorists, writers, and then people that do it all. We're online. We're trying to eventually want to have local chapters around the world, but for now we're mostly online to do our organizing. And yeah, we're just trying to improve everyone's wages, our quality of life, and also, protect our members from predatory contracts, and yeah, just improve everything, generally speaking. And you can definitely join either as a member or a volunteer. Members have requirements, volunteers do not. And the requirement is very simple. It's helping out with the co-op or a co-op member once a year. So very simple, very low stakes involvement. But a lot of people really enjoy the co-op. We are constantly sharing opportunities, activities, events, programming. We have a lot of stuff in the works that is really beneficial to cartoonists in all stages of their career. So if you're interested, please take a look at our website and apply.
Yeah. And to answer Cody's question, we kind of are, yes. If you've heard us talk in the general meetings, a little peek behind the curtains for people who aren't in the co-op. We have general meetings every month, and one of the subjects we've been working on is for the past, I believe, about for a full year, we've been working with a couple different lawyers on figuring out how we can become a legal organization fully, whether a nonprofit or otherwise. Most of the the freelancers union, that's a nonprofit. That's not an actual union. So we still have to figure out where we stand legally in a way that makes sense for everybody else. It's complicated.
Not surprisingly, it is complicated. Yeah.
In response to Marie's question, I would say the question is, do translators count as comic workers? Absolutely. If you work on a comic, you are a comic worker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
especially
agreed.
in a creative capacity, which translation totally falls under that category based on some of the decisions you have to make.
Yeah, any kind of translation localization effort, I would argue, is definitely a comic worker based practice for sure. There's an example of also about examples of ways people contribute. All sorts of different ways that folks contribute to the co-op. Sometimes it's just giving feedback on other people's work. Sometimes it's joining different working groups and committees. There's some great examples in chat. But really, if you're helping each other or the organization in some way just to keep going, then you're doing your part. Basically, yeah.
I know one way people contribute that's a very like kind of fun low stakes way is to draw our mascots, which we use those in like newsletters and like public facing stuff as like ways to spice things up.
Like the survey that we just did, we had some really great contributions from our members here, which you could find credited in the PDF itself.
Kevin asks, I've run into people that want to join the co-op but don't know if they can because they do comic support work like me, aka websites and marketing. Should they put it in their application? They should apply as volunteers. We have a subset of people that we don't consider members, but we consider part of the cooperative because they are able to help us in other capacities that we call volunteers. So they could put in their application there, and they could absolutely mention what kind of support work they do for comics. That would be great.
And we've definitely had folks who've gone from volunteers to members because they've like done work around comics like illustration, but then started making comics like more tangibly. And so, it's it can be an ongoing process. Yeah, there's lots of folks talking about great efforts that are happening in the co-op in terms of benefits, in terms of printer discounts, and the donation that is running. We're currently doing an eSIM donation drive for eSIMs for Gaza that is running right now, to make sure that members can donate, send art over for folks who show proof of receipt of donations to Connecting Gaza. So that's a really amazing initiative that is also another way to contribute. And highly recommend it if you're someone coming across this who either wants to donate art or wants to donate an eSIM.
And it's a great way to kind of help if you don't know what to do, but you have an online shop or you already do commissions. It's pretty easy to kind of slide into your workflow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Give it a sec for folks to catch up. If anybody has other
I think that's about it, though. We did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending. I think we got a really nice turnout.
Yeah. We'll have to start on next year's survey soon as well.
I know. It's already like May. It's already gonna be the middle of the year. No.
Yeah, happy Workers' Day in the US.
Yeah, happy
Yeah.
Workers' Day.
Happy May Day, everybody. Thank you so much to everybody who joined in the chat. Thank you so much if you're watching in the VOD. They really appreciate you tuning in. We'll hopefully have another next year's Comic Workers survey ready for you real soon.
Yes. Exciting. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.